Hello, and welcome to I Hate Talking, a podcast about talking, including etymology, frustrating topics, current events, and other random subjects. I'm Adam.
And I'm Steph. We are married, and we invite you into these discussions with us as we talk about the good and the bad of talking.
We hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome to episode 44 of I Hate Talking.
Hi, everyone.
So can you hear me this time?
I can hear you.
Well, hopefully our listeners can hear us as well. If you can't, maybe perhaps turn up your volume. That would be the first thing to check.
That's always a helpful tip.
Check if your Bluetooth is connected to your headset or your vehicle. That also helps.
Yeah.
Make sure it's not connected to like some other Bluetooth device that is now playing our podcast to some other room in your house.
That's happened before.
Uh-oh. And like we said last time, if you are enjoying this podcast, like, share, subscribe. We're on YouTube now. We're on all the different podcast platforms. And we're just having fun doing podcasts, just like all the other people in the world doing their own podcasts.
There are a lot. But I really enjoy sitting here talking with you.
Precisely. So we're going to pick up on some of the things that we did not get to in our last episode, since we sort of just went all over the place with a variety of topics.
We were talking about sonder.
We were talking about sonder, but I feel like we went into a space of perhaps deep
First person
narrative. Desires and like what drives a person.
Okay.
And sort of what they desire in terms of human interaction. So that's fine. It probably is part of the human experience that we can.
Probably a major part of the human experience. I would argue that almost everyone has first person syndrome.
Well, that is sort of the point of sonder, is that everyone considers themselves as the primary character.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I guess it was related after all.
There you go.
So, our word or phrase of this episode is NPC, because that was an extra topic that we were going to talk about last time, but we did not get to. Didn't even mention it, in fact. But before we get to that particular word or phrase, NPC, we will talk about neologism, because the word sonder is a neologism, and we did not define that in our previous episode. So we want to do that very briefly here in terms of what neologism is.
I've been on pins and needles waiting for this.
So neologism is actually not a neologism, because neologism is a newly coined word or expression, and it does not necessarily have any particular etymology. It's not used in previous decades or centuries and sort of evolves over time. It is simply a brand new word or phrase. Now, the interesting thing about neologism is that neologism is based on a variety of root words, neo and logos. So logos being related to word, and neo being related to new. So it literally means new word, neologism.
All right.
So there you have it. I don't know if it's Greek or Latin. Greek is the answer. Logos. Well, that makes sense. Greek is logos.
So it's a new word or new compound word put together in the Greek. But what makes like the word a word? Like, why is this a new word? Because it makes sense to say new word.
So neologism is not the new word. Neologism is an old word based on etymology of new and logos, or based on neo and logos, literally new word. But sonder is a neologism because it just basically was coined by that particular author that we talked about last time.
So is it thinking of like subcategories? Like this word, how do you say it?
Neologism.
Neologism is a new word that was subcategories now of words in our modern day vernacular that we use?
I'm confused on what you're asking. Are you asking if neologism is
I thought you said that was a new word.
literally, it means new word,
Right.
but it
Okay.
itself is not a new word. It is simply used as a word to describe new words.
Oh man, this is okay. So this word's been around for centuries.
So it actually has been around for centuries. It
Okay.
was used in the early 1800s. Now it does become more prevalently used in the early 2000s. So it does gain more usage over time when we look at our favorite Google Ngram viewer. But neologism is by no means a new word. It simply describes new words that come out of nowhere.
Okay. So I misunderstood earlier when you were like, it's a new word. I thought you meant like it came into our modern day vernacular recently. But you're just saying it means new word.
Correct.
Okay.
So sonder is a new word that has come into the vernacular as of 2012, and that is a neologism, but neologism is not a neologism.
Okay. I'm following now. I'm tracking now. I'm on the train.
All right, we're on the neologism train. So our official word or phrase of the episode that we decided to make a word or phrase of the episode because we didn't talk about it last time is NPC.
Okay.
So NPC is a acronym.
Okay. So NPC, non player computer. No, NCP. Wait, non computer player. Wait, I don't know. Go ahead and tell us.
So that's interesting because you may have been getting at the way that this particular acronym NPC is used, the actual letters NPC, non-player character.
Yeah. Okay. Right? Is that what you mean?
So that is what seems to be the typical definition of NPC. If somebody had asked me before I had done the research for this particular episode, I would have said non-playable character.
Okay. But what it is it's the computer playing, right? Like if you're playing a video game, it's the computer playing against you
Or with you.
or with you. Yes. But it's a non player. It's not a real player.
Correct. Non-player.
Or not playable, like you said. I guess that makes sense too.
Exactly. So based on some of the research, there may have been some overlap here. And it's hard to get the results from the Ngram viewer for this particular phrase. One, because I think that NPC is actually used within the normal vernacular and it's not really spelled out, as well as the fact that this is hyphenated, so that sort of messes up the Ngram viewer in terms of where it picks up this phrase. And the phrase non-playable character actually sort of trends with non-player character for the last maybe 10 to 15 years ago. And then for the last 5 years, non-player character spikes and non-playable character sort of just flatlines.
Interesting. So only in the last 5 years, which would make sense because my kids are getting to the video game era and they talk about that. I've never been a video game person. So it makes sense. I would think of it as non-player. But isn't that similar? Non-player versus non-playable. It has to be if it is non-playable, then there's has to be a non-player.
Precisely, and I think that's actually perhaps what I observe and even have experienced is that in the quote-unquote early years of computer intelligence in terms of controlling a character that is non-playable or a non-player is that in the early years you would sort of customize your character. You may do different things to outfit it with certain abilities or attributes, and that the other characters within the game that may not even be really part of the experience, they just may be maybe part of cutscenes or whatnot. You can't choose to be them nor make your character look like them. So they are a non-playable character. You can't play as that character. Whereas in more of the modern day, with artificial intelligence and these characters actually being more of a part of the game, that they might be on your same team or they may be an enemy that you have to overcome in the particular video game, that they are a non-player character because they are not being controlled by a human player, but are instead just part of the game mechanics and the artificial intelligence that is controlling that particular character.
But are they the same then? If you are able to change their looks or purpose a little bit versus absolutely not being able to touch it at all, is that both NPCs the same way?
I would say not, because there may be a character that exists in the game that simply exists that you cannot play as, and that would be the non-playable character, versus a character that exists in the game that you interact with in the game that, for all intents and purposes, appears as another player, but they are non-human, and that would be the non-player character.
But then you get to a whole different... How far down this rabbit hole do we want to go? Because then you get to a whole different level, right, of like playing with online people. Are they real people or are they NPCs? Or are they a mixture of both? How do you really know?
Precisely, and that is the point that we wanted to relate to our previous episode, is that if you are not experiencing sonder, or maybe you are, that if you don't have a high degree of the sonder experience, that you sort of treat these other people as NPCs and not as real people.
Like emotional intelligence and that sort of thing. Could you also then say sonder intelligence? And if you have a high degree of sonder intelligence, you would not treat them as NPCs. If you have a low sonder intelligence, you would treat everyone with NPCs. As NPCs.
Well, there you go. I guess you came up with your own neologism as an acronym. Go. SI.
Add it to the dictionary.
Sonder intelligence.
Sonder intelligence. Pointing it right now.
So I do think that that would be generally described as emotional intelligence, where you are going to be empathetic or sympathetic to others when you're interacting with them, that you're going to treat them with the respect that other humans deserve and basically respect their humanity, as it were. But yes, I think that part of the reason that you respect their humanity is the fact that sonder exists and that they are living a rich and complex life just as you are.
So when I'm in Starbucks, in line, in the drive-thru, and there's somebody taking an exorbitant amount of time to order, and in my heart, I want to just be so frustrated because I just want my iced Americano, and they're taking too long. I can just be grumpy about that, or I can think, hey, they're not an NPC. Maybe they are on their way to a really big business meeting that their whole team is about to get laid off. So they're bringing them frappuccinos to soften the blow.
Could be. Or to take it to the extreme, perhaps the barista just had a medical episode and collapsed on the floor while they're making their coffee.
So not treating the barista as an NPC, character, creating my Americano, I can think of them as an individual with that maybe just had their niece was just born in the hospital and they cannot wait to go meet them when their shift's over.
I suppose so. That all is within the realm of possibility. And that is the realization that they do have a very complex life that they are living and their own desires and goals that they want to achieve.
Do you think that you treat people as NPCs, or do you intrinsically see them as individuals?
So if they stay within the normal course of human behavior, I don't necessarily potentially pay them much mind and probably would fall maybe more within the NPC category. So if we're waiting in line for the checkout at the grocery line and they are just doing everything that is normal for an American to do and standing with their cart, maybe looking at their phone, checking out what things there are in the checkout line, in the candy aisle or magazines or whatnot, that I'm, like I said, not going to really concern myself with what they are doing. And that's sort of how I would treat that. However, if they were acting in a way that was abnormal, perhaps talking to themselves or something of that nature, that I would pay them more attention. And I don't know necessarily if sonder would come into play in that instance, but I just have a greater sense of awareness on my situation and what was happening around me.
I think it also comes to mind when I'm thinking about the internet, like how rare it is to talk to another individual face to face, really rude, or tell them everything you're thinking. But when you're behind a computer, they seem more like an NPC, right? Like you can tell them all the things you hate about them or perceive about them that you hate, and any kind of disagreement. It's much easier behind a keyboard than if you're in line at a grocery store.
That is true. And that's actually something that we mentioned very briefly last episode, is the humanity of people and how you see people. Because perhaps if they are driving a vehicle and you cannot actually see the person within, that they are not really necessarily considered as a person in your mind. You just see them as another vehicle on the road. And likewise, if they are behind a keyboard and maybe have a profile picture that is just an emoji or a bitmoji or whatever, and not necessarily their actual picture, that you will really not see them as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting that this actually plays a part in traffic theory because of that very thing that I mentioned, that people don't see other vehicles as people. So you don't necessarily consider, when you're cutting somebody off or driving erratically, that that really affects a person because they're just vehicles on the road. It also has to do with some things within the psychology of warfare, where some training for soldiers may make the enemy appear less human by dressing them in attire that is not normal to that culture, or even just not showing human faces when they're doing training for warfare, because that dehumanizes the enemy and makes it easier for that person to then engage with the enemy. And you even see that within Star Wars with the stormtroopers. They are basically non-human for the experiences of both the rebel forces as well as the person viewing the movie. You don't really see the stormtroopers as people. You just see them as NPCs.
Interesting. So, would you say that if you see someone's face, their eyes and their nose and their mouth, does that make you more empathetic or sympathetic to them?
Absolutely. Scientific research has shown that, just with some of the things that I mentioned in terms of traffic and vehicles, as well as warfare and the dehumanization of the enemy.
Are people more likely, or are you more likely to be sympathetic to an individual on the screen that you see their full face, or somebody in person that's face is covered with maybe, say, a mask, a stormtrooper mask?
So there is something to be said of how much of the face is covered and whether that is the eyes or not, right? Because I think that you can even see that in modern day with poker competitions, where a lot of poker players will wear glasses that are shaded and very dark so that you cannot really see their eyes in terms of maybe where they're looking or what their particular facial response is, versus a covering of the mouth that again can be prohibitive in understanding people's reactions and emotions with the facial muscles that may smile or smirk or frown or grimace. So I would say that the eyes are going to be the primary way that you are going to be able to determine the humanity and reaction of a person, and that perhaps the screen versus in person does not matter as much because of the fact that their face is present, but that in person there will be other physical indications such as how they are sitting or fidgeting or moving their body that may not be present when just looking at their face on a screen.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I buy all that. Have you heard of the illusionist named Spidey?
Spidey, as in the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man?
Not like her toddler loves. No, not Spidey and his amazing friends. There's a illusionist. His name is Spidey. I've been binging a lot of his YouTube content. But he's an illusionist, like in Vegas and places like that. But he also spends time reviewing like famous cases or people at interviews and explaining why they're lying or why they're not. And he'll even reference like, oh, well, Facebook quizzes will say this means lying, yada, yada. But he'll explain why it doesn't mean that and why people fidget the way they do. Because I think I'm self-conscious of that. I fidget a lot. And according to Facebook and things like that, would be I'm untruthful. I'm like, but I'm not. I just physically cannot stand still. And so he explains physiology like that. And so it makes me think of that when you're talking about seeing the eyes and the way the eyes look versus the way the mouth twitches and that sort of thing. Definitely shows their humanity and brings more sympathy or empathy to the situation.
Indeed. So, again, I think we are running into the fact that social media, Facebook, AI, does not get things right, and in a lot of cases does not provide truth. So hopefully we can garner some insights from this podcast as well as our friend Spidey,
Yeah.
whom I've never heard of, but I guess I will check him out.
Yeah, maybe we can go to a show one time. It'll be good. I really love magicians and illusions. I am a really good audience member because I get fooled by that stuff so easily.
Yeah, I treat it as basically entertainment and maybe even get frustrated at if I don't see a reasonable explanation on how they did something. One of my favorite shows was that guy that did what was it called? Was the magician that shared all the secrets on how different magician.
The Masked
Yeah,
Magician?
the mass magician.
Oh, he was so good.
But
Yeah.
I didn't really care for the actual person. I just enjoyed learning how everything was done.
Me and my brother were so into that show. We should watch it sometime. Find it, rewatch it.
I'm sure we'd be thoroughly disappointed. It probably has some form of elevated position within our minds from
When we were children.
yes.
Right, but like the stakes were so high because if they caught him, he was giving all these tricks out and he was going to get in so much trouble. Whatever happened to that?
Well, maybe that was the greatest trick of all, is that was not true, and
No,
it was
it
just
was- Okay, I don't want to research it because in my head, the stakes are so high. Don't say that it was like a hoax.
it was just a marketing technique.
Oh. To my brother who listens to this, I'm so sorry if you heard that. Keep believing in the masked magician.
Well, hopefully we didn't ruin the magic, but if you're listening to this, hopefully you are a real person and not an NPC. But if you're an NPC, share it with other NPCs. And if you're a human, share it with other humans. So, from your friends at I Hate Talking, until next time, remember, it is only through talking that we begin the journey to understanding.